My name's Leszek, and I will be talking with Pascal Christian Weinberger about impact of automation and challenges and solutions. You've had a fascinating journey from the intersection of machine learning and neuroscience, including Google Brain and various machine learning projects, to eventually becoming the CEO and co-founder of Bardeen. Could you walk us through your professional journey leading up to your current role and where you're at today?
Sure. So I was always interested by this concept of intelligence, like starting with, human intelligence. How do we make decisions? How do we think? How do we plan? And I quickly learned that, in this field of like neuroscience, computational neuroscience, there's this model system of artificial intelligence to try to like understand and replicate basically what happens in our brains. And that was like a really fascinating field for me because you can make a lot of like progress really quickly because it's in computers. You can run experiments quickly and so. So I jumped into this rabbit hole of AI, starting with computer vision. Did my first company and project in computer vision space, and kind of over the last 10 years, like tried various different things in that space, and ultimately kind of understood that like it's really cool to build like new novel algorithms and new research and so on, but ultimately like I want to have like impact with this, right? Like I want to build something that people use, that people can have a benefit from, that can actually like have a positive impact in the world. And when we look at like how we as people spend our day, I feel like we waste a lot of time doing things that are very repetitive, that are frankly boring and dull work to do. And I think at this point we're in this intersection, where like the technology of AI, thanks to large language models and a lot of like recent progress that has been made, is at the point where we can actually have like meaningful impact and meaningful solutions through automating some of that repetitive work, using AI to basically make people more productive and remove all this friction and annoying things from our workflows. And I think that's for me, is a really exciting problem to work on that we're doing with Bardeen, because ultimately, if you can make, I think about it like if you can make every person like 10% more productive, like you've unlocked a huge amount of human potential, creativity, time that can be used to make progress in other fields. And I think for us, that's a very exciting thing. Also, you're just making people's lives a bit easier, which is always nice to do. So that's kind of like how we arrived at Bardeen. Interestingly, like my co-founder had a very similar idea at the time. It was really kind of like a funny moment when we started the company where we both kind of pitched each other on the same idea. At that time, like I had called it like Project Me.ai, and he called his thing Mini Me. Basically the same, like, with the idea to like automate the repetitive things that we were both doing when we were running like, tech teams and engineering teams. And then like, that was like about 3 years ago now, we've kind of made a lot of progress and built something that like really allows you to automate a lot of the repetitive work that people are doing in the browser. And it's very exciting.
Sure. I mean, my understanding is that it's not about like, the nature of basically the machine learning at this stage is not about, reducing amount of work. It's actually about having even more bigger impact. I like these words by Sam Altman. I mean, he basically says, and he addressed the fears of software development community. It's not, AI is not going to replace you. We're going to create 10 times more code, 10 times more products, etc. So I think there's what you said basically very resonates with me very much in that context as well.
Yeah, I think the way to think about it is like humans have never run out of work. Like I think that the historic context is that like, a few hundred years ago, like 80% of us were working on the field. Like we were basically working in agriculture. Like then, we automated a lot of it. There's machines, we had fertilizers, a lot of things that like changed. And now like, it's like single-digit percentage of population in the Western world works in agriculture. But we found other things to do. We build software companies, we build investment banks, we build podcasts, we do all these other things. I think like we'll see a similar thing happening with, as AI takes over more and more of our work, we'll find other things to do, and we will just do more of it. I think like overall, I'm very much in this like abundance mindset. I think like we'll figure out some way to make this more productive. And as of today, I think like all the impact we've seen has been vastly positive.
Nice. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk a little bit about Bardeen and the product itself. So, I mean, the general description that I found over there and during my research is that it's a bridge between simple workflow solution and complex system, offering no-code automation. And even on your website, you highlight the effortless aspect of automating tasks. Can you talk a little bit about that context of the product? What specific problem do you solve? And basically the story of the inception of Bardeen.
Yeah, sure. So I think if you look at the automation industry as a whole, you kind of see that there's a bunch of tools already that promise automations, but they're mostly built for like either developers or for like big companies that come up with like consulting teams to actually like build the automation for you. And like really there's this huge market that's, underserved of people who are actually doing the work. Like people who are like working in sales and recruiting and, like real estate brokers, like you name it, like, they have their own small companies, medium-sized companies, sometimes even at large companies. And they're the ones actually doing the work. And they're detached from the automation process today. Because the tools that are in existence, they're either too complicated or just like not designed for them and meant to be used by them. And I think like what we're trying to do with Bardeen is we're really trying to bring automation to the person who's actually running like the automation and actually doing the work today. And if you want to do that, you have to solve for a few things, right? Like you have to just like actually bring it to them. So the product is a Chrome extension. Like we all spend most of our work days today in Chrome. Like, thanks to the explosion of SaaS apps, everything we use now is a web app and we use it in the browser. Or even if it's not in the browser, it's like a progressive web app that's basically like an app that runs in a simulated browser. So I think like everything happens in the browser. So we bring Bardeen to where the user already is in the browser as an extension. And then you have to make it very easy for people to use it. And that's where AI comes in our setting. So building an automation is inherently a hard problem to do because you're basically coding, you're basically building a program. And doing that like is not something everyone, who doesn't have a technical skill set or something can do. What we're doing with Bardeen is we solve for this with a few different ways. We built this no-code builder that just like makes it like it abstracts a lot of the complexity away, and it has a lot of design decisions built in that just makes it easier to like understand what's happening in a program, not automation. And then second of all, you can solve for this with like pre-built automations. So we ship the product today with roughly 1,500 pre-built automations that are all the different things that from our user community, from ourselves, from customers and so on, we know that are things that people need to use this product for. And then instead of like putting the burden on the user to build it, we just say like, okay, we'll build it for you. Like it's pre-built. You only have to configure or log in with certain services and so on. So like you vastly reduce the friction. And then the third way you can kind of like simplify it is you change the interface. So instead of having to like write code or like use even a no-code builder that still sometimes requires technical thinking, you just allow the person to describe the workflow that they want to automate in natural language. Mm-hmm. The same way that I would brief like say an intern or my assistant or someone to do something for me. I'd say like, hey, can you every time I have a new recording on Zoom, I need to like get the transcript and put it in like a Notion page for my meeting notes, and I also want to update my CRM system with the contact information of the person I had to call with. Like that could be a description I give to my, analyst, assistant, whoever, to ask them to do something for me. And we can take this exact same description in Bardeen and we can understand this and interpret this and basically build the workflow for you from that simple text description. And with that, you again, like reduce the entry barrier for people. And really like our vision with the product is to bring automation to everyone who's actually doing the work. And therefore like, unlocking large amounts of productivity.
Mm-hmm. I've got a follow-up question to that, which is, do you observe that there's any specific field or market where the traction gets the most momentum, like where the product resonates with the problem and the solution resonate the most with the target audience, or say it's recruitment sales. There's a lot of products around marketing automation, and I think that's like naturally there's a lot of tasks to automate. But do you see some interesting discoveries when it comes to market segments of this market? Because apparently it's a very, very big, broad definition of your ICP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like there is a two-sided sword with a product like Bardeen, right? Like you're basically an automation platform, so really like the imagination or the problem space of the user is the limit to what they can automate with Bardeen within the integrations that we support. Having said that, there's certain types of roles that lend themselves to automation, and those are all the roles that they have like highly repetitive workflows, and usually like their performance is measured by the amount of times they can run this workflow, for example, like an SDR, an account executive, people working in sales. In general, they usually do a lot of outreach, and their performance is usually measured by some sort of function of how much and how successful their outreach is. So that role lends themselves really, really well for automation. And that's also where we see a lot of traction. Very similar with recruiting, for example, right? Like if you're trying to fill a role, it's usually a numbers game, right? You want to reach out to, a larger number of qualified.
It's a similar game. It's just like selling the job versus selling the product, or I think there's just so many similarities there. So.
Yeah, exactly. So we also see this with, things that we haven't even thought about when we built this product, but like in real estate, for example, we get quite some traction where it's like, real estate marketers who need to like get new listings and monitor new listings and so on.
Right. Customers.
Like those are things that like, honestly, we haven't even thought about when we built the product, but we kind of naturally saw like pull from users, and then we focus on it. So there's basically like a few different areas, sales, real estate, recruiting, those types of spaces where we see like big chunk of our traction, but you can think about it as like a long tail distribution. There's also, people in product management, people in, like we have teachers using the platform. We have like, people in roles that like we didn't even think about when we built the app, that they just kind of like naturally discover it. And then they have some parts of their workflow that they want to automate. And because of our go-to-market motion being very like organic and product-led, they kind of like self-discover their use cases and onboard themselves.
Mm-hmm. The second follow-up question is, what are the biggest technical challenges you face when building such a new solution? I can only imagine that, for example, the number of integrations is to keep them alive is a challenge. To build them is a challenge. There's a lot of stuff that you have to integrate with. Probably the basically the no-code builder or basic text-driven development of the automation. I think these are my guess is that these are maybe the difficult part. But can you shed a little bit more light on the like the difficult parts of the solution?
Yeah, I think you're not wrong there. I think that there's different ways something can be difficult, right? Like so, for example, you touched on integrations. Like building those integrations is very cumbersome, very difficult. We have actually built some AI tools internally that help us to automate building the integrations, right? So like it's something that like it's a lot of work, right? Like it's a big technical barrier. I think it's something that like also over time will differentiate us, and it becomes an entry barrier to any new player that wants to enter the market. But it's once you figured out how to do it, it's not like, the most intellectually difficult work, right? On the other hand, you have things that are really intellectually really difficult, like this, how do you get like a text description and interpret this into an automation and build a reliable automation from it. That's something that's really difficult to like just even understand and grasp how to do. And then there's, other things that are, I think like are challenges also for us as a team is like user experience, right? Like if we want to make this easy to use for everyone, like making a product easy to use is really hard. It's kind of like it's just like, really interesting like phenomenon in tech that like it's way easier to build a very complex interface and a complex product that's hard to use. It's like super easy because you just throw the buttons wherever you want to throw them, and like you give the user all the options and so on. But like then it's impossible to use for most people. Or you have to, make very conscious decisions, do all the tests, A/B tests, user interviews, like really figure out like how to do this. And then it looks like a very simple product, and you look at it and you're like, well, this can't be so hard to build, but it actually is really hard to build. And those are kind of like challenges we struggle with, every company struggles with, and we're working through. And then, also for us as a team, it's like we're a very technical team. So both my and my co-founder's background and most of our company's team's background is very technical. For us, it's also other things like how do we, it's like once you build a product, you now need to figure out like how do you get users and customers on the platform, right? So like figuring out like, okay, what's the go-to-market motion? How do you make it scalable? How do you make it sustainable? How do you actually make sure that people like understand what the product can do and educate them and all these things? Those are all also challenges that you have to work through. But I think like that's the exciting thing with building any tech company is there's not only one thing, like there's like always a big battery of challenges that you have to work through.
Absolutely. Thousands of battles and or decisions to be making. Speaking of decisions, I'd like to ask you about the most difficult trade-offs that you had to that you have to decide on when making Bardeen or building. Have you had basically some difficult trade-offs, trade-off type of decision that you had to make along the way?
Yeah, I mean, it's countless. I think it's like every time I think that there's some simpler ones. I love this concept, like Jeff Bezos kind of, I guess, gets quoted for this, but like sometimes like when you're building a company, there's like revolving door decisions and one-way door decisions, like there's some decisions you make them and like there's very hard to go back on. And then there's
reversible and irreversible, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's things you can like easily A/B test basically, right? You're like, okay, like, whether you make the button, like simple example, like whether you make the button like green or red, like, okay, just like try both and see what works better, And I think like there's a lot of the hard ones that we had to make in terms of like our architecture, the form factor of the application, like figuring out like how do we, get the product to a place where like it's easy to use for end users. A lot of the things in terms of like hiring, team constellation are always, difficult decisions. I think almost everything, like, fundraising, who to work with.
Speaking of fundraising, you have some notable investors on board. Could you share a little bit of context of how this fundraising worked for you? How hard or how easy was it? And basically tell us a little bit of Bardeen's story in that context.
Yeah, it's always there's so many like better stories from fundraising, but like I think the high level is like, we're very blessed with our investors. I think we have amazing investors on board that are both really like good at the like technology side, like they understand the complexity of what we're building and they're supportive of that, and that they help us make better decisions. And then on the other hand, they have amazing go-to-market experience and exposure there that helps us, complement the skill set that like my co-founder and I have. So I think from that side, we're extremely lucky. Fundraising is always like a difficult part of any founder's journey, right? I think like we were lucky in that sense that what we're building is extremely relevant to the times today. Like in the current economic climate and in the current, just kind of like technology landscape with AI and language models becoming more and more relevant and known. A lot of people are asking themselves, like, what is the next generation of automation tools? And I think like we are a compelling answer to that question, and that makes it, I don't want to say easy. That's not easy, but it makes it more attractive for people to believe in our vision and to support what we're building. I think like in terms of fundraising, if I could share advice, I don't know, it's like, I think it's all the relationship and the trust game. I think like we, like both my co-founder and I, we've been in the startup world now for many years. So we have existing relationships with people who, they support us and trust us and understand how we think and how we work and all these things. And that makes it a huge amount easier, right? Like if you're a first-time founder, you don't know anyone, no one knows you, you don't have your reputation, you basically start from scratch. Like it's always much harder than if you've kind of, have an existing network and connections and so on to rely on.
And track record also helps.
Yeah. Of course. I mean, it's like everyone's trying to make rational decisions, and like if you're making rational decisions, like having any sort of data points is always a good a good thing to rely on, and I think that's helpful. And then it's also just like you have to actually like build a product that people like. Like I think like something that's good with what we're doing is that like it's relatively easy for people to like actually try it out and get started and understand. I think there are other companies when you're trying to raise money for where it's like it takes you like a few meetings to even understand what it is that you're doing and what you're trying to solve for. And I think like, we're in that category where it's relatively easy to understand and buy into that long-term vision. And I think like almost no one I talk to wants to do more repetitive work and wants to do more like annoying work. Like almost everyone wants to reduce the friction in their workflow.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned fundraising. You mentioned multiple battles or decisions in various fields. And I'd like to ask, how do you handle the balance between deep technical work? Do you still do the deep technical work? And, broad strategic, managerial, fundraising duties? How do you balance those multiple roles that you have to do at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think there's phases, in any company. Like, for example, right now, like we're not raising any money, so like I basically spend no time on that. I mean, now my personal focus is much more on like, okay, how do we scale our go-to-market? How do we build out our go-to-market team? How do we, like, what's the channels that we should rely on? How do we build them out? What's the story? What's the narrative? How do we position ourselves? All those type of questions are like much more important for us to figure out today. On the technical side, we're really lucky because like we have an amazing team of people who are way smarter than me in a lot of our technical challenges. So, they handle most of that. I like to still be involved every now and then, especially like, in earlier phases of the companies, like, for me personally, I mean, when you're a smaller team also, you have to, right? Like now we're like 30 people plus team. Now, like, whether or not I can contribute code doesn't make as big of a difference versus when we were like 3 people team, like, basically, you're like 30% of the productivity of the company. So like, of course you have to contribute code and push forward on that front. So I think there's, different phases, and I don't think there's a right answer for, anyone. It really depends on like what your skill set is and what you get excited about as a founder. Also, like for me, I thrive in like complex technical challenges and like complex people challenges and like, relationships and like long-term strategic thinking and so on. So like that's what I try to focus my time on.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah. And you have to, I think that as a founder, you always have to think about like, how do you leverage your own time so that it brings the most impact to the company, right? Like and that answer varies, right? Depending on your skill set and like the market you're in, the specific timing of the company, the stage of the company, the problems the company has, and so on. So that there's no right answer to this. I think it depends.
I think so too. There's also, but I think there's one thing that I actually came to my mind is that you have to be also quite self-aware. Without, it's just not following the hottest thing out there, the most shiny thing. You have to know. You have to make really strategic decisions when with regards to your time allocation.
Yeah.
I've got a final question to you, which is reflecting on the challenges you faced in your career. What are the most critical leadership lessons you've learned, and how have they shaped your approach to leading your team, your company, your business?
It's a great question. I think in terms of it's hard to pick one. I think like really what makes a difference over time is all the little things you learn, like all the little, conflicts you have, the little mistakes you make. Like, I mean, you always learn from your mistakes. I think for me personally, the biggest things I learned were around people, just like who to trust. Like when you trust people, like you have to trust them fully. Like you can't micromanage people. Like that's the best way to get rid of high performance is to try to micromanage them. So I think for me, it's really around like the people challenges. Like I think for personally, like I think like for me, the most important lesson learned was that like, like when someone shows you their true face, like believe who they are and like don't try to fix them and just like build the system around it, right? And like that can be
embrace it.
Embrace it and make the hard decisions sooner rather than later. I think something I've personally struggled with in my career before was like I was like too much of a people pleaser, if you will. Like I would be like, oh yeah, like it's fine, it's not working out, but like maybe
same here.
Like that never worked in my favor or our favor.
That works short term only, I believe.
Yeah, and it's just like it's like just I think like making hard decisions faster rather than procrastinating on it, huge impact, and like trying to remove yourself and your ego from basically anything you do. I think those are the most important things. And like one thing for me personally is like the sunk cost fallacy. Like you're always like, I've already invested so much into this, business.
So much time, so much money. Yeah, it was spent.
Yeah. And then you're like, you keep pushing for it and you keep believing in this whatever dream or version of the person or company or like whatever it is that you kind of like subscribe to. That's just not reality. Like I think making that realization earlier is always better. And it is very vague, but I think it applies to many different things. Like in
it does.
Co-founders, businesses to spend time on, investors to spend time on basically anything in your business.
Great advice. Thank you very much, Pascal. It was great stuff, great value. Thank you very much for the talk today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Great to meet you, man. See you.
Better Tech Leadership powered by Brainhub. Follow Leszek on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Better Tech Leadership newsletter.